The restaurant went completely silent. 50 of the wealthiest people in the city froze, forks suspended halfway to their mouths. In the center of the room, a 4-year-old boy was screaming so hard his face was turning blue. Standing over him was Ethan Caldwell, a man worth $6 billion, clearing his throat and looking utterly helpless for the first time in his life. The manager was already calling security. Diners whispered about spoiled kids and bad parenting. But then a waitress with exactly $12 in her bank account walked straight past the security guards. She knelt beside the boy, ignored the billionaire entirely, and whispered 5 words that changed everything. She didn't know it yet, but that moment would uncover a secret buried for 4 years. A secret that would nearly get her killed. The Obsidian Room was the kind of restaurant where a glass of water cost more than Odetta Bennett made in an hour. It was a place of hushed voices, velvet curtains, and the soft clink of heavy silverware against bone china. For Odetta, it felt like a minefield. At 24, she was exhausted. Not just from the double shifts or the way her feet felt like they were bleeding inside her cheap, non-slip shoes, but from the deep, bone-tired weariness of a life spent running just to stay in place. She adjusted her apron, smoothing the fabric over her waist, and checked her reflection in the brass panel of the service station. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it gave her a headache. Her uniform was spotless. It had to be. At the Punjinko. At the Obsidian Room, one mistake didn't earn a warning, it got you fired. Table 4 needs a refill on the Pinot. Move, Bennett, hissed Henry. The floor manager. Henry was a small man with a mustache that twitched whenever he was angry, which was always, yes, chef, on it. Odetta murmured, grabbing the decanter. The atmosphere shifted at exactly 7:15 p.m. The heavy oak doors swung open, and it felt like the air was sucked out of the room. 2 large men in tailored suits entered first, scanning the space with practiced suspicion. Then he walked in, Ethan Caldwell. Everyone knew the name: tech mogul, real estate tycoon, and lately, the city's most eligible widower. He was taller than he looked in magazines, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. His face was sharp, handsome, and cold. His eyes were dark tunnels that gave nothing away. But tonight, Ethan Caldwell didn't look powerful. He looked like a man on the edge of a breakdown. Clutch in his hand was a small boy, maybe 4 years old, wearing a tiny suit that clearly made him uncomfortable. The boy Leo dragged his feet, his face flushed red, his breathing coming in short, uneven gasps. Please, Leo, Ethan whispered tightly. Just sit down, just for an hour, please. They were seated at the prime table in the center of the room. All eyes were on them, whether they wanted the attention or not. Odetta watched from the shadows near the kitchen. Something tugged at her chest as she looked at the boy. He wasn't being difficult. He was terrified. His eyes darted wildly around the room, overwhelmed by the crystal chandeliers, the low hum of conversation, and the heavy smells of truffles and roasted duck. It was too much. Pure sensory overload. Don't stare, Henry snapped, shoving a tray of appetizers into Odetta's hands. Take this to table 7 and stay away from the Caldwell table. Only I serve Mr. Caldwell. Odetta nodded and moved on, but her ears stayed tuned to the center of the room. The trouble began 10 minutes later. Henry placed a plate of elaborate hors d'oeuvres in front of the boy, something topped with caviar and gold leaf. I don't want it. Leo's voice cracked, sharp and piercing. Leo, eat. It's just food, Ethan said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He looked drained. Do you want the iPad? Do you want to go home? I want Mommy. The word hit the room like a gunshot. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Everyone knew the story. Ethan's wife, Isabella, had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. Leo had been in the car with her. Mommy isn't here, Leo, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Stop it. You're making a scene. No, I want Mommy. Leo swept his arm across the table. The plate of caviar, the crystal water glass, and the vase of fresh orchids crashed to the floor. Glass shattered. Water spilled everywhere. Leo screamed. Not a bratty tantrum scream, but a raw primal sound of panic. He slid out of his chair and curled into a ball on the floor amid broken glass and spilled water, clamping his hands over his ears and rocking back and forth. "Oh, for God's sake," a woman at the next table muttered, dabbing her mouth with her napkin. "Control your child." Ethan stood up, his face drained of color. He reached down to grab Leo. "Get up, now. Don't touch me." Leo shrieked, kicking wildly. Henry rushed over, his face turning purple with outrage. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm so sorry. Perhaps it would be best if we escort the child to the car. The other guests, I'm trying." Ethan snapped, finally losing his composure. He looked down at his son, and for a brief second, Odetta saw a pure, unfiltered fear in the billionaire's eyes. He had no idea what to do. He had billions of dollars, but he couldn't buy his son's calm. Security guards began moving in, their shadows stretching over the sobbing child. Odetta didn't think. She didn't look for Henry. She didn't think about her rent or her last paycheck. She set her tray down on an empty table with a loud clatter and walked straight into the center of the room. "Stop," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. Ethan looked up, startled. "Excuse me?" "Back off," Odetta said to the security guards. She knelt on the floor, right in the puddle of spilled water and caviar, ruining her uniform. She didn't care. She didn't reach for Leo. She didn't try to hush him. She simply sat a few feet away and lowered herself until she was at his eye level. "It's too loud, isn't it?" she whispered. Leo stopped screaming just long enough to suck in a shaky breath. He looked at her, eyes wide and wet. "The lights," Odetta said gently, ignoring the 50 people staring at her. "They buzz like angry bees. And the forks sound like swords hitting shields. It hurts your ears." Leo sniffled, his chest rising and falling fast. He gave a tiny nod. Odetta slowly extended her hand, palm up, keeping it perfectly still. She didn't move closer. "My name is Odetta," she said softly. "I know a magic trick that turns the sound off. Want to see?" Ethan stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. Henry was making a slashing motion across his throat, silently telling her to stop, but she ignored him. Leo nodded again. "Okay," Odetta whispered. She began to hum. It wasn't a lullaby. It was low and steady, a deep vibration pulled from her chest. She tapped her fingers on the floor in a slow, rhythmic beat. 1, 2, 1, 2. "Copy me," she whispered. Leo hesitated, then tapped one small finger against the floor. 1, 2. "He doesn't need discipline," Odetta said, finally looking up at Ethan, her voice carrying enough weight to silence the room. "He doesn't need a manager. He needs to know he's safe." She turned back to Leo. "You're safe here, Leo. The bees are gone." Leo crawled toward her. He didn't go to his father. He crawled straight into the arms of the waitress in the stained apron. He buried his face into her shoulder and sobbed, but this time it was the quiet crying of relief. Odetta wrapped her arms around him, rocking him gently, ignoring her ruined uniform and the cold stares of the elite. For one brief moment, the restaurant was peaceful. Then the spell shattered. "What do you think you're doing?" Henry hissed, grabbing Odetta's arm and yanking her upward. Leo cried out as she was pulled away. "Get your hands off her," Ethan barked, his voice dropping an octave. Henry froze. "Sir, she is disturbing. She is the only person who has helped him in 6 months," Ethan said flatly. He looked at Odetta. Really looked at her, the frayed collar of her uniform, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way his son was still reaching for her hand. "I'm sorry about the mess," Odetta said quietly, pulling her arm free. She looked down. "I'll clean it up." "Leave it," Ethan said. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a black card, and tossed it onto the table. "Add 5,000 for the damage, and another 5,000 for her tip. The room gasped. "We're leaving," Ethan said. He picked up a now calm Leo, who looked over his father's shoulder and reached one hand toward Odetta. "Bye, lady," Leo whispered. "Bye, Leo," Odetta said, her heart aching in a way she didn't understand. At the door, Ethan stopped. He turned back, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Thank you." Then they were gone. Odetta stood in the center of the room, her knees wet, her heart pounding. Henry walked toward her, trembling with rage. The $5,000 tip meant nothing to him. The broken protocol meant everything. "Pack your things," he whispered venomously. "But..." He gave a tip. "You embarrassed this establishment." "You sat on the floor like an animal," Henry hissed. "You're fired, Bennett. Get out, now." The rain in Seattle was cold, but being broke made it colder. Odetta stepped into the alley behind the obsidian room, carrying a cardboard box. Inside were her worn shoes and a half-eaten granola bar. She had no umbrella, and she never received the $5,000. Henry claimed the money, went into the house pool to cover damages and the emotional distress caused to the other guests. Odetta knew he pocketed it himself, but she didn't have the money to hire a lawyer or fight him. She took the bus to the south side of the city, to a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and sirens never seemed to stop. Her apartment was a studio, polite language for a closet with a sink. She unlocked the door, shivering, and immediately saw the paper taped to the inside. Final notice: eviction. Outstanding balance, $1,200. You have 48 hours to vacate. Odetta slid down the door until she hit the floor. She didn't cry. She had forgotten how to cry years ago. Tears took energy, and she had none left. Her eyes drifted to the nightstand. The only personal thing she owned sat there, a grainy ultrasound photo dated 4 years ago. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the picture. "I'm trying." The next morning blurred into rejection. Odetta walked into 5 coffee shops, 3 diners, and a dry cleaner. No one was hiring. She looked desperate, and managers could smell desperation like cheap perfume. They didn't want it in their stores. By 4 p.m., she was sitting on a park bench, counting her change. She had enough money for a sandwich or a bus ticket to a shelter, but not both. She was about to stand when a car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't just any car. It was a matte black SUV with tinted windows, the kind that looked like it belonged in a presidential motorcade. The back door opened. A man in a suit stepped out. It wasn't Ethan. He was older, bald, with a scar cutting through one eyebrow. He looked ex-military. "Odetta Bennett." Odetta clutched her purse. "Who's asking?" "Mr. Caldwell would like a word." "I didn't steal anything," Odetta said quickly, her heart pounding. "If this is about the uniform, I left it in the locker." "Get in the car." "Miss Bennett, no." The man sighed and held up his phone. On the screen was a live video feed. It showed a massive living room, with toys scattered everywhere. In the middle of the room, Ethan Caldwell paced back and forth. Under a table, Leo was screaming. "He hasn't stopped since this morning," the man said. "He's asking for the magic lady. Mr. Caldwell is desperate." Odetta stared at the screen. She recognized the pain in the boy's rigid body, in the way he curled in on himself. It was the same pain she felt every morning when she woke up alone. "I'm not a babysitter," Odetta said, even as her resolve began to crumble. "Mr. Caldwell is prepared to pay you $10,000, the man replied, "just to come to the house for 1 hour." Odetta's mouth went dry. $10,000. That was a year of rent. That was a fresh start. 1 hour. Just 1 hour. She looked down at the bus ticket in her hand. Then she looked at the sleek black SUV. "Okay," she said. The drive took 30 minutes. They left the city and wound up into the hills, where houses had names instead of numbers. They stopped at the gates of Blackwood Manor. It was a fortress, of stone and glass overlooking the ocean. The front door opened before Odetta could reach for the handle. Ethan Caldwell stood there. Wasn't wearing a suit this time. He had on sweatpants and a t-shirt. His face was unshaven, his eyes frantic. "You came," he said, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for hours. "I heard you were having a rough day," Odetta said as she stepped inside. The foyer was the size of a cathedral. "Rough day," Ethan repeated bitterly. He threw a vase at the nanny. "She quit. That's the third one this month." He dragged a hand down his face. "He's in the library. I can't get him out." Odetta walked past the Billionaire and followed the sound of soft whimpering. The library was breathtaking floor to ceiling. Shelves packed with books, but it looked like a war zone. Books lay scattered across the floor. A lamp had been overturned. Leo was hiding beneath the heavy oak desk, wrapped tightly in a blanket. Odetta didn't announce herself. She walked over and sat cross-legged on the Persian rug. She didn't look under the desk. Instead, she pulled a small, crinkled paper crane from her pocket. She had folded it from a napkin during the bus ride. She placed it on the floor and flicked it gently, so it slid under the desk. Silence. Then a small hand reached out and grabbed the crane. "It flies," Odetta whispered. "But only if you're quiet," Odetta whispered. "Loud noises scare its wings." Leo peeked out from under the desk. His face was swollen and red from crying. He looked at Odetta, then at the paper crane. "Magic lady," he croaked. "It's Odetta," she said with a small smile. "But Magic lady works too." Leo crawled out. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. He climbed straight into her lap, just like he had in the restaurant, and rested his head against her chest. Ethan watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost. "How do you do that?" he asked quietly. Odetta stroked Leo's hair. "I listen." She glanced up at Ethan. "Adults listen to words. Kids want you to listen to the feeling." Ethan stepped into the room. He really looked at her this time, at the worn-out sneakers, the cheap jacket, the exhaustion she carried like a second skin. "You were fired," he said. "Because of last night." Odetta didn't look up. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." Ethan leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. "I looked into you, Odetta Bennett. High school dropout. No next of kin. 5 waitressing jobs in 3 years. He paused. "Eviction notice filed yesterday." Odetta stiffened. She gently lifted Leo off her lap and stood. "If you're done doing a background check on my misery," she said flatly, "I'd like my money so I can leave." "I don't want you to leave," Ethan said. "I'm not a charity case." "I know," he replied. "You're a necessity." Ethan straightened. The businessman returned, sharp and controlled. "I have a company to run. A life I've been neglecting because I'm terrified to leave my son alone. You're the only person he responds to. I don't know why, and frankly I don't care." He took a step closer. The air between them crackled with something unfamiliar. "I'm offering you a job. Live-in nanny. 100,000 a year. Full benefits. You'll have the guest cottage on the estate. The room spun, Mr. Caldwell. Ethan. And there's one condition." Odetta narrowed her eyes. "What condition?" Ethan's expression darkened. A shadow passed over his steel-gray eyes. "You handle Leo, you keep him happy. But you stay out of the East Wing. The 3rd floor is off limits. If you go up there even once, you're gone. No second chances." Odetta studied him. She saw the desperation, but she also saw something else. A secret. A deep, dark secret buried behind his calm exterior. She should run. She should take the $10,000 and disappear. Then a small hand tugged at her jeans. She looked down. Leo was holding up the paper crane. "Fly?" he asked. Odetta looked back at Ethan. "Deal." She said. Life at Blackwood Manor settled into a rhythm that felt almost too perfect. For 3 weeks, Odetta Bennett lived a life she had only ever seen in movies. She had her own cottage on the estate, a charming stone building wrapped in ivy, with a working fireplace and a bed that didn't squeak. But the real miracle was Leo. The screaming stopped. The meltdowns faded. Under Odetta's care, the frightened little boy began to bloom. They spent hours in the gardens hunting for bugs or racing paper boats in the fountain. She taught him how to tie his shoes and how to make grilled cheese sandwiches, much to the horror of the French private chef. Jean-Pierre. Ethan changed too. He was still distant, still buried in work, often leaving before sunrise and returning after dark. But Odetta caught him watching. Sometimes he stood on the balcony of his study, looking down at the garden where Odetta and Leo played tag. A look of deep sadness and longing etched across his face. Peace at Blackwood Manor was fragile. And it shattered. On a Tuesday afternoon, Odetta was in the kitchen helping Leo with a puzzle when the front doors slammed open. The sharp click-clack of high heels echoed across the marble floor like gunfire. "Ethan, where are you?" A woman swept into the room. She was stunning in a cold, manufactured way platinum blonde hair, a white pantsuit that cost more than Odetta had earned in her lifetime, and eyes that evaluated everything like an investment. This was Vanessa Sterling, senator's daughter, socialite, and according to the tabloids, the future Mrs. Caldwell. Vanessa stopped short when she saw Odetta. Her gaze traveled over Odetta's jeans and t-shirt, then flicked to Leo, who immediately shrank behind Odetta's leg. "So," Vanessa said coolly, "you're the new hire." "I'm Odetta," she replied evenly. "I'm the nanny." "Nanny?" Vanessa scoffed, circling the table and inspecting the puzzle. "Ethan's gone through 4 nannies in 6 months. Don't get comfortable, honey. You're just a Band-Aid on a bullet wound." She smiled thinly. "Leo, why don't you go find your red truck?" "Leo," Odetta said softly, "why don't you go get it?" Leo ran off. Odetta stood up and faced Vanessa. "Can I help you with something, Miss Sterling?" "You can help me," Vanessa hissed, stepping closer, "by staying out of my way." She leaned in, her smile sharp. "I know your type. You think because you got the sad widower to open his wallet, you've got a shot at the throne. But let me tell you something about Ethan. He's broken. And he belongs to people who understand his world. Not to a waitress who smells like grease and desperation." Odetta felt her temper flare, but she forced it down. "I'm just here to do my job." "We'll see," Vanessa said, flashing a shark smile. "Ethan is hosting a charity gala here on Saturday. Save the Oceans Foundation. I organized it. I expect you and the boy to be invisible. And if Leo causes a scene, that's on you." The rest of the week was a nightmare. The house was overrun with caterers, florists, and event planners, all barking orders. Vanessa ruled them like a general, and she made sure Odetta stayed at the very bottom. She criticized Leo's clothes, his hair, even his manners. The night of the gala, Blackwood Manor transformed. 500 guests packed the ballroom. Champagne flowed like water. Music echoed through the halls. Odetta stayed upstairs in the nursery, reading to Leo. She had managed to keep him hidden, safe from the noise and chaos. "I want water," Leo whispered. "Half asleep. I'll get it," Odetta said gently. "Stay in bed." She slipped into the hallway and headed for the upstairs kitchenette. As she passed the landing overlooking the ballroom, she paused. Ethan stood below, devastating in a tuxedo. He was speaking with a group of investors, his smile practiced, his eyes bored. Vanessa clung to his arm like a barnacle, laughing too loudly at everything he said. Odetta felt a sharp pang of jealousy she had no right to feel. She filled the glass and turned to leave. "Hold on." Vanessa stood at the top of the stairs. She must have slipped away from the party. She looked slightly drunk and very malicious. Enjoying the view? Vanessa asked. I'm just getting water for Leo. You know, Vanessa slurred, leaning against the railing. Ethan talks about you. Odetta is amazing with him. Odetta is a miracle. It's sickening. He loves his son, Odetta said quietly. He loves the ghost, Vanessa spat. He looks at you and Caesar, Isabella, don't you get it? You're just a cheap copy. Odetta froze. What are you talking about? Before Vanessa could answer, she stumbled. She reached out, grabbing Odetta's arm to steady herself. In the motion, she slipped something into the front pocket of Odetta's utility apron, the one she wore to carry Leo's EpiPen and toys. Oops, Vanessa giggled. Clumsy me. She pushed off Odetta and headed back toward the party. You should check your pocket, dear. You wouldn't want to be accused of anything. Odetta frowned. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers touched cold metal. She pulled it out. A diamond bracelet, heavy, ornate, worth thousands. Thief! Vanessa screamed. The music below stopped. Her scream echoed through the balcony. She stole it. Security! Vanessa shouted, pointing a manicured finger at Odetta. Within seconds, Ethan was charging up the stairs, 2 security guards right behind him. Guests stared up from the ballroom, whispering, "What is going on?" Ethan demanded, his eyes blazing. I caught her, Vanessa sobbed. Launching into a performance worthy of an Oscar. I came upstairs to use the powder room, and I saw her coming out of your bedroom. Ethan, she had my diamond bracelet, the one you gave me for Christmas. Ethan looked at Odetta. She stood frozen. The bracelet in her hand, her face drained of color. Odetta? Ethan asked quietly. I didn't take it, she said, her voice trembling but steady. She put it in my pocket just now. Oh, please, Vanessa scoffed. Why would I do that? You're the broke waitress with an eviction notice. I'm a sterling. Who has the motive here? It was a trap. Perfect and vicious. The weapon was class. Who would believe the poor girl over the heiress? Ethan studied the bracelet. Then he looked at Vanessa. Finally, he looked back at Odetta. He held her gaze through a long, agonizing silence. Give me the bracelet, he said. Odetta handed it to him. Ethan turned it over in his hands. Then he looked at Vanessa. You're lying, he said calmly. The hallway fell silent. Vanessa's mouth dropped open. Excuse me? This clasp, Ethan said, holding it up. It's tricky. You have to push a safety pin to open it. It takes 2 hands. There's no way Odetta could have unclasped this from your wrist without you noticing. And if you weren't wearing it, it would have been locked in the guest room safe, which requires a fingerprint to open. My fingerprint. Vanessa's face flushed red. I must have left it out. No, Ethan said, his voice turning to steel. You planted it. You did it to humiliate her. Ethan, she's a nobody. Vanessa shrieked, her mask finally cracking. Why are you defending her? She's just the help. She is the only person in this house who is real, Ethan said coldly. Get out. What? Get out of my house, Vanessa. We're done. Vanessa looked around, realizing she'd lost. A sound of pure rage tore out of her as she spun on her heel and stormed down the stairs, shoving past the stunned security guards. Ethan let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging. He turned to Odetta. Are you okay? Odetta's hand shook. Thank you for believing me. Ethan stepped closer. He lifted a hand, almost brushing her cheek, then stopped himself. I know you, Odetta, he said quietly. I've watched you with him. You don't want things. You just want peace. Why did she say that? Odetta whispered. That you look at me and see her. See Isabella. Ethan stiffened. The warmth drained from his eyes, replaced by something cold and sealed shut. She was drunk, he said abruptly. Go check on Leo. He turned and walked away. Odetta stood alone in the hallway, gripping the cold water glass. He had defended her, but he hadn't answered the question. 2 weeks after the gala, the storm of the century slammed into the coast. The sky turned a bruised purple. Wind howled around Blackwood Manor like a wounded animal. The power flickered on and off all day. Ethan was supposed to be in New York for a board meeting, but all flights were grounded. Still, he wasn't home. A flooded bridge had trapped him at his office in the city. "I can't get back tonight," Ethan said over the phone, his voice crackling with static. "The bridge is washed out." "Odetta, are you all right?" "We're fine," Odetta said, gripping the phone as thunder rattled the windows. "We have flashlights. Arthur's checking the generator." "Listen to me," Ethan said urgently. "If the power goes out, the security system resets. Bolt the doors manually. And keep Leo in his room. Storms scare him." "I will." "Don't worry. And Odetta," he added, "stay out of the East Wing. The roof leaks during storms. It's dangerous." "I know the rules," she said. The line went dead by 9 p.m. The house was pitch black. The generator rumbled to life, casting dim emergency light through the halls. Long, skeletal shadows stretched across the walls. Odetta was in the kitchen, making hot cocoa when she heard it, a door slamming. "Leo?" She called. No answer. She rushed to the living room, empty. Up the stairs. Leo's room. His bed was empty. The window rattled violently in its frame. "Leo." Panic tightened around her throat. Then she heard it, a giggle. It echoed from the far end of the hallway. "Drifting toward the East Wing. Leo, no." Odetta sprinted down the hall. The air grew colder as she reached the massive double oak doors marking the forbidden wing. They were ajar. She hesitated. Ethan's warning rang in her ears. "If you go up there even once, you're gone." But Leo was in there. She pushed the doors open. "Leo, come out. This isn't funny." The East Wing wasn't damaged. It wasn't leaking. It was perfect. Thick plush carpet. Air scented with lavender and old paper. Silence complete and insulated from the storm outside. Odetta moved slowly down the corridor, her flashlight beam slicing through the dark. She passed rooms that looked like untouched guest suites. Everything pristine. At the end of the hall stood a single black door. She heard a soft thump from behind it. Odetta didn't hesitate. She turned the handle. Unlocked. She stepped inside and gasped. It wasn't a bedroom. It was an art studio. Canvases lined the walls. The faint smell of turpentine and oil paint lingered in the air. In the center of the room sat Leo, cross-legged on the floor, holding a large leather-bound book. "Mommy's book," he whispered. "Leo." "We have to go," Odetta said, rushing to him. "Daddy will be furious." "Look," Leo said, pointing toward an easel covered with a dust sheet. "Mommy." A chill ran through Odetta that had nothing to do with the storm. She reached out and pulled the cloth away. Her flashlight slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. The painting beneath was a masterpiece, vivid, alive. A woman sat in a garden wearing a white sundress. She was smiling softly, a gentle, knowing smile. It was Odetta. Not just similar, not a coincidence. It was her. The same nose, the same slightly crooked incisor, the same birthmark on the collarbone, a tiny star-shaped mark. Odetta had covered with makeup every single day since she was 16. Her breath caught. Her hand flew to her own collarbone. "How?" She spun slowly, panic rising. The walls were covered in sketches, dozens of them. Sketches of her, laughing, sleeping, crying, captured in moments she didn't remember living, her hands shaking. Odetta grabbed the book Leo was holding. It was a diary. Embossed on the cover were the initials I.C., Isabella Caldwell. With trembling fingers, she flipped to the last entry, August 12th, 3 years ago. The day of the accident, I found her. After all these years, the private investigator finally found her. Her name is Odetta Bennett. She lives in Chicago. She doesn't know I exist. She doesn't know we were separated. Ethan tells me to leave it alone. He says bringing her here will only cause pain. But I have to know her. I have to tell her the truth about our parents. I'm driving to the city tonight. I'm taking Leo. I want him to meet his aunt. I'm going to bring her home. The diary slipped from Odetta's hands and hit the floor. Twins. They were twins. Identical twins. Isabella hadn't died in a random car crash. She had been driving to find her. You look like Mommy, Leo said softly, tugging on Odetta's frozen hand. But you're nicer. Odetta's mind spiraled. The instant bond with Leo, the way Ethan looked at her like longing mixed with fear. He had known. He must have known the moment she walked into that restaurant. Suddenly, the lights exploded on blinding white. The generator roared back to full power. I told you, a deep voice thundered from the doorway. Never to come in here. Odetta spun around. Ethan stood there, drenched. Water dripped from his coat onto the pristine carpet. He had driven through the flood. He had come back. He wasn't looking at Leo. He was staring straight at Odetta. In his hand was a key. Ethan, Odetta whispered, backing up until her shoulders brushed the portrait of her dead sister. You knew. I tried to stop you, Ethan said as he walked inside, his voice frighteningly calm. I tried to pay you off. I tried to fire you. But you kept coming back. She was my sister, Odetta choked. Why didn't you tell me? Ethan stopped inches from her. He glanced at the painting, then at Odetta. Because if you know who you really are, he said quietly, then you'll know what actually happened that night. And I can't let that happen. What? Odetta whispered. It was an accident. The police report was wrong, Ethan cut in, picked up the diary, and snapped it shut. Isabella wasn't driving to find you, Odetta. She was driving away from me. The silence in the studio felt heavier than the storm outside. You drove her away? Odetta asked, her voice shaking. The man she had begun to trust now felt like a stranger. Ethan collapsed into a leather armchair, suddenly exhausted. Not the way you think, he said. Someone was feeding her lies. For months before the accident, Isabella had grown paranoid. Letters, emails, photos, doctored. Proof that Ethan was having an affair, that he was planning to institutionalize her and take Leo. She didn't tell me until the night she left, he said. She screamed that she was taking Leo to her sister. To you. Somewhere I couldn't find them. His eyes were rimmed red. I chased her car. It was raining just like tonight. She sped up. Took the hairpin turn on Route 9 too fast. He swallowed. The brakes didn't work. Odetta's blood ran cold. The brakes? But the police ruled it weather-related, Ethan said bitterly. But I hired a private investigator. He found cut marks on the brake line. Then the evidence disappeared from the impound lot. Someone wanted her dead. Or, Ethan added softly, they wanted me dead. She was driving my car. Odetta looked at the portrait of her twin sister. And you think whoever did it is still here? I know they are, Ethan said. That's why I hired you. Her stomach dropped. Not just because Leo needed you, he continued, but because you are the bait. Odetta stepped back, horrified. I'm bait? I'm sorry, Ethan said, standing. I needed to flush them out. I knew if the ghost of Isabella returned to Blackwood Manor, the killer would panic. They would try to finish the job. And when they did, he would be ready. You used me, Odetta whispered, tears burning her eyes. You let me bond with your son. You let me live in this house just to catch a killer. I didn't expect to care about you, Ethan snapped, the control finally cracking. I didn't expect you to be the only person who makes my son laugh. I didn't expect to fall in love with you." The words echoed in the room. Ethan looked as stunned as she felt. Like he couldn't believe he'd said them out loud. Before Odetta could answer, the lights flickered, then went out completely. The generator died. "That's not right," Ethan said quietly, his voice shifting into something sharp and tactical. "The generator has a backup fuel cell. It never just shuts off." He reached into his coat and pulled out a gun. Odetta gasped. "Stay here," Ethan ordered. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." "Oh, Ethan, where are you going?" "To find Uncle Robert," he said grimly. "He runs estate maintenance. He's the only one who knows the generator's override code." Then he was gone. Disappearing into the dark hallway, Odetta stood frozen in the darkness. Lightning flashing through the windows, illuminating the portrait of her dead sister on the wall. She heard the lock click into place. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. And then she heard it. Leo's scream, not from the hallway, from the baby monitor still. Clipped to her pocket. "Let me go, Odetta." "Odetta!" She didn't hesitate. Odetta grabbed a heavy brass statue from the desk and kicked the door open. She didn't care about the killer. She didn't care about the plan. She ran. The nursery door was wide open. The room was emptied out. The window to the fire escape was shattered. Odetta rushed to it. In a flash of lightning, she saw a figure in a black raincoat sprinting across the lawn toward the cliffs, overlooking the ocean, carrying a struggling child. "Leo!" Odetta screamed. She didn't wait for Ethan. She climbed out the window onto the slick metal fire escape, her foot slipping, her shins smashing painfully against the railing. She scrambled down and hit the muddy grass at a run. The wind slammed into her like a wall. But she lowered her head and pushed forward. The figure was heading for the old boathouse at the edge of the cliff. Odetta burst through the doors, soaked and gasping for breath. Inside, the figure turned. He held Leo with one arm, dangling him dangerously close to the open drop where boats were, lowered into the raging water 20 feet. Below. The man pulled back his hood. It wasn't Uncle Robert. It was Henry, the manager from the Obsidian Room restaurant. Odetta froze. "Henry, why?" Henry smiled, but it was wild and desperate. "I lost everything because of you. Mr. Caldwell fired me. Blacklisted me from every restaurant in the city." He laughed shakily. "I have gambling debts. Big ones. And the man who owns those debts gave me a choice: kidnap the boy for ransom, or die." "Who?" Odetta demanded, stepping closer. "Who paid you?" "Does it matter?" Henry spat. "Stay back or I drop him." Leo sobbed, his small legs kicking over the black, swirling water below. "Odetta," he cried. "Magic lady, help." "Henry, look at me," Odetta said, her voice low and steady, the same calming tone she used with Leo. "You don't want to hurt a child. You're a snob. You're cruel. But you're not a murderer. You don't know me." Henry yelled, his grip slipping on Leo's rain-soaked coat. "I know you're scared," Odetta said softly, inching forward. "I know you're in too deep. Give me the boy. We can fix this. It's too late." Henry screamed. Suddenly, his eyes widened as he looked past her. Odetta turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, gun raised, but behind him, a shadow moved. Uncle Robert. He was holding a crowbar. Robert swung it hard, smashing it into the back of Ethan's head. Ethan collapsed instantly. The gun skidded across the floor. "Good work," Robert said calmly, stepping over his nephew's body. He wore an immaculate trench coat, untouched by the storm. "But the plan has changed. No ransom, no witnesses. Uncle Robert." Odetta whispered, horrified. "It's just business, my dear," Robert sighed, adjusting his cufflinks. "I built this company with Ethan's father. But Ethan wanted to give our profits away, save the oceans, feed the poor. He was destroying our legacy." His smile was cold. Isabella discovered I was cooking the books. She had to go. He shrugged. And now, well, a tragic kidnapping gone wrong. Ethan and the nanny dead. The grieving uncle inherits everything. Robert picked up Ethan's gun and aimed it at Odetta. "Throw the boy into the water, Henry," Robert ordered. "No." Henry hesitated. "That wasn't the deal. Do it, or I shoot you first," Robert snarled. Henry glanced at the water, then at the crying boy. Then he looked at Odetta. Odetta held his gaze. "Henry, you helped me once. You gave me that shift when I was starving. You're not this." Henry's face twisted in anguish. Robert fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Henry closed his eyes and, in a desperate moment, threw Leo, but not into the water. He flung him toward Odetta. Odetta lunged, catching the boy in midair. They crashed onto the wooden deck. She rolled, covering Leo with her body. "Traitor," Robert growled. He aimed the gun at Odetta, and Leo clicked. The gun jammed. The wet conditions had caused a misfire. Robert cursed and fumbled with the slide. That second, just 1 second, was all Odetta needed. She didn't run. She grabbed the flare gun from the emergency wall kit. She didn't know how to aim. She just pointed it at Robert's face and pulled the trigger. A blinding red flare exploded across the boathouse. Robert screamed, dropping the gun and clutching his face, blinded by the phosphorescent glare. He stumbled backward, tripped over a coil of rope, and fell through the open hatch into the churning black water below. The storm swallowed the splash. Henry slumped against the wall, sobbing. Odetta held Leo tight, rocking him gently. "It's okay. The bees are gone. It's okay." Ethan groaned, pushing himself up from the floor. He looked at Odetta, at his son, and at the empty space where his uncle had stood. "Odetta," he rasped. "We're here," she whispered. "We're safe." 10 minutes later, police cars arrived, their blue lights cutting through the rain. Detective Harrison arrested Henry, who went quietly, weeping with relief. Coast Guard boats scoured the water for Robert, but the currents at the cliff base were merciless. He was gone. Ethan refused medical attention until he saw Odetta and Leo checked out by paramedics. They sat in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in thermal blankets. "You saved him," Ethan said, holding an ice pack to his head. His eyes never leaving Odetta. "His family," Odetta said simply. "Your family too," Ethan replied. "I mean it. We did the DNA test earlier today, before the storm. The email came through while I was out cold." Odetta looked at him. 99.9% match. She was Isabella's sister. She was Leo's aunt. Ethan squeezed her hand. "But to me, you're just Odetta, the woman who saved my life and my son's life." Odetta looked down at Leo, asleep on her lap, clutching the paper crane she had made him weeks ago. It was crushed wet, but he wouldn't let go. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan smiled for the first time, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Now, I fire you." Odetta's heart dropped. "What? I can't employ you as a nanny," Ethan said softly. "It would be inappropriate for the woman I intend to take on a date." Odetta laughed a wet, tearful laugh. "A date? I have nothing to wear. My uniform is ruined." "I think we can fix that," Ethan said. "Maybe find you something that isn't an apron." 6 months later, the Obsidian Room had closed. In its place stood the Isabella Foundation, a center for children with sensory processing disorders and autism. In the garden behind the center, a picnic was laid out. Odetta sat on the grass in a yellow sundress. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wore a delicate ring on her finger, a sapphire. Blue as the ocean she had saved Leo from. Leo ran through the grass, chasing a golden retriever puppy named Barnaby. Ethan walked over carrying a tray of lemonade. He sat down next to Odetta and kissed her cheek. "He looks happy," Ethan said. "He is happy," Odetta replied. "He just needed someone to listen." "I'm listening now," Ethan said, looking at both of them. Odetta leaned her head on his shoulder. She took the ultrasound photo she had carried for so long from her pocket. She looked at it, then at the grave marker nearby under the willow tree. Isabella Caldwell. I found you, Odetta whispered to the wind. And I found home. Leo ran back to them, breathless and smiling. Odetta. Look, the butterfly sat on my nose. That means you're lucky, Odetta grinned, pulling him into a hug. No, Leo said, looking at his dad, then at Odetta. I'm not lucky. I'm loved. As the sun set over the estate, casting a golden glow over the three of them, Odetta knew it was the truest thing anyone had ever said. The waitress who had only $12 to her name was now the richest woman in the world, not because of money, but because she had found the one thing money could never buy, a family. From a screaming child in a restaurant to a daring rescue on a stormy cliff, Odetta proved that sometimes the people who have the least have the most to give. She lost her sister, but she found her purpose. And Ethan learned that you can't buy peace, but you can build it with love. Wow. I actually teared up at the end there. What did you think? Did you suspect Uncle Robert, or did you think it was the jealous fiancé? Let me know in the comments below if this story touched your heart. And please, do me a huge favor, hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story like this. We upload incredible real-life dramas every single week. Thanks for watching, and clears throat. Remember, be kind to the waiter. You never know who they might be. See you next time.